Before we begin, do me a favor and tell me your city and country in the comments below. I absolutely love knowing where our worldwide audience is watching from. Today's tale is one of the most powerful stories to come out of World War II, a moment when a single song broke down the emotional walls between enemies and revealed a truth that no one in the entire camp could have ever expected. It was December of 1944, Camp Grant, Illinois. The air was frigid, and the tension of war hung over everything like a heavy, frozen blanket. An American soldier, a young private named Samuel Carter, was on the night shift. To pass the quiet, lonely hours, he picked up a harmonica and began to play a simple melody. The tune was soft, quiet, almost haunting as it drifted through the cold night air of the prisoner of war camp. Suddenly, a sound behind him broke the stillness. It wasn't a guard or another soldier. It was a German POW, a man in his late 30s, known for being tough, silent, and hardened by the front lines. He dropped to his knees, his body trembling. Then he collapsed completely, burying his face in his hands and sobbing uncontrollably. Guards rushed forward, thinking there was a fight or an escape attempt. Other prisoners stared, their faces a mixture of confusion and shock. Samuel Carter froze, the harmonica still pressed to his lips. The German POW, his face streaked with tears, looked up at him. With shaking hands, he asked a question that seemed to make no sense. Where did you learn that song?" Carter, completely bewildered, could only stammer a reply. "It's just a lullaby. My mother used to play it for me." The German prisoner covered his face again, and his voice, thick with emotion, broke as he spoke words that silenced the entire camp. "My wife, she sang that same lullaby to our daughter the night I left for the war." In that moment of shared melody, a door opened to a truth that neither man was prepared to face. The prisoner's name was Friedrich Adler. He was 37 years old, a former school teacher from the city of Cologne. He had been captured in Normandy during the American advance. Among his fellow German prisoners, he had a reputation. They called him the silent one, the disciplined one, the man who never smiled. He was a ghost in the camp. He refused the cigarettes offered by the guards. He refused to talk about the war. He refused to argue or engage in the heated political debates that often broke out among the POWs. He simply existed, a man wrapped in a shell of silence. The American guards assumed he was a hardened Nazi, a true believer in the Reich. He never denied it, but then again, he never denied anything. The truth, however, was far more complex. It was a truth buried under layers of pain, duty, and loss. Samuel Carter, the young harmonica player, had only ever seen Friedrich from a distance. He saw a tall, serious man who walked with the weight of the world on his shoulders, a man carrying an invisible, crushing burden. No one, not the guards, not the other prisoners, and certainly not Carter himself, could have imagined that a simple, forgotten lullaby would be the key to breaking him wide open. That night, after the melody shattered his composure, the story of Friedrich Adler finally began to unfold. After Friedrich collapsed, the camp medics quickly brought him to the infirmary, worried he'd had some kind of breakdown. Carter, still shaken and holding his harmonica like a strange weapon, followed them. He felt a confusing mix of guilt and curiosity. What had he done? Inside the infirmary, the German POW kept whispering to himself in German, "It cannot be. It cannot be," over and over again. When he finally calmed down, his breathing evening out, Carter approached him cautiously. "What did I do?" he asked quietly. "I'm sorry if I—" Friedrich took a slow, shuddering breath and looked at the young American soldier. Then he explained, "The song you played, Mont über den Hügeln, Moon over the hills." His voice was low, reverent. "My wife, Clara, she sang it to our daughter the night I left for the Eastern Front. It was the last time I saw them. I have not heard it since that day." Carter's mind raced. How was this possible? My mother sang it to me, too, he replied, his voice barely a whisper. She called it Moon Over the Hills. She always said it was an old Bavarian tune. Her parents, my grandparents, came from Germany. Friedrich's eyes, which had been dull with despair, suddenly widened. A flicker of disbelief, then recognition, sparked within them. He sat up slowly, the rough infirmary blanket pooling around his waist. Your family is from Bavaria? Carter nodded. Yeah, my grandmother was born in a small town near Regensburg. Friedrich covered his mouth with his hand, his body trembling again, but this time it wasn't from sobbing. It was from shock. He understood something that Carter was just beginning to grasp. This lullaby wasn't a famous national song. It wasn't a wartime march that every soldier knew. It was a rare regional family melody, passed down through generations, almost like a secret whispered from mother to child. Friedrich's voice was hoarse as he spoke the impossible truth. My wife, she learned it from her grandmother, who lived in a village just outside of Regensburg. Carter stared. Friedrich stared back. The world outside the infirmary window, with its barbed wire and guard towers, seemed to melt away. In its place was a connection that defied logic, that defied war. Somewhere, somehow, across an ocean of conflict, two families from two countries torn apart by hatred shared the exact same intimate lullaby. Two strangers, an American guard and his German prisoner, were suddenly and inexplicably connected by a song that neither of them should have known. That night, in the quiet of the infirmary, Friedrich Adler began to speak more than he had in all his months at Camp Grant combined. The dam of his silence had been broken, and the stories flooded out. He told Carter about his past, painting a picture of a life that was nothing like the guards imagined. He wasn't a member of the Nazi Party. In fact, he'd privately detested their ideology. He held no personal hatred toward America or its people. He was a schoolteacher, a man of books and poetry, who was drafted into the army because he was literate and disciplined. He spoke of his wife, Clara, and how she had begged him not to go. He described kissing his newborn daughter's forehead before he left, her scent still fresh in his memory. He'd made her a promise. He promised he would return and sing that lullaby to her himself. He paused, his voice breaking as the weight of that broken promise settled upon him again. I never saw them again. Carter felt a chill run down his spine. It was the question every soldier feared asking. Did they die in the bombings? Friedrich shook his head slowly, his eyes lost in a distant memory. I do not know. The last letter I received was in 1942. It spoke of shortages, of fear, but they were alive. Then, nothing. Just silence. It was the silence that kills more than bullets, the not knowing that eats away at a man's soul until there's nothing left. Friedrich explained why the song had broken him. When you played that song, he said, looking at his own trembling hands, for a moment I was home again. Not the Germany of war and ruin, but the Germany of my kitchen, of my wife's hands kneading dough, of my daughter's warm breath on my neck as she slept. He looked up at Carter, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. I thought I had forgotten the sound of my wife's voice. I tried so hard to remember it, but it was gone. But the song, it brought everything back in a single moment. It was too much. Carter sat beside him on the cot, the harmonica feeling heavy in his pocket. He realized something incredibly powerful. He, an American soldier, had accidentally resurrected a German man's last, most precious memory of love and family. In the middle of a place designed for dehumanization, a simple melody had reminded a man of his humanity. After a long silence, Carter took a deep breath. He felt a strange compulsion to share something of his own, a secret he rarely spoke of. My father died when I was young, he began, his voice soft. My mom raised me all by herself. That song, Moon Over the Hills. It was her way of keeping the memory of her parents, my grandparents from Germany, alive. It was just for us. Friedrich listened intently, his gaze never leaving Carter's face. Carter continued, I didn't join the army for glory or to fight for an idea. I joined to make money for her. She was getting sick, and we needed it. Friedrich nodded slowly, a deep understanding passing between them. They stared at each other, two men who never wanted this war, who had no hatred for one another, but were trapped on opposite sides of its brutal machinery. Friedrich then whispered a sentence that struck Carter to his very core. War takes the fathers. The children carry the silence. Carter closed his eyes, because that was it. That was exactly how he had felt his entire life, carrying the silence of a father he barely knew. In that small, sterile room, they were no longer a guard and a prisoner. They were just two sons, bound by a shared song and a shared sorrow. Over the next few weeks, something remarkable began to change in Camp Grant. Friedrich, the silent POW, was silent no more. He began to emerge from his shell. He started helping the American guards translate letters from other German prisoners, bridging a gap of language and mistrust. He used his old skills to fix broken wooden tables in the mess hall. He even began mediating conflicts between the younger, more volatile POZ, his calm demeanor and thoughtful words earning him a new kind of respect. The American soldiers stopped seeing him as just another German. They started calling him a teacher. Carter began meeting with him almost every evening. They wouldn't talk about the war. Instead, they talked about everything else: music, poetry, religion, their childhoods, their families. It was a small island of peace in an ocean of conflict. The American guards, seeing the change in Friedrich, began to respect him. Some even asked him to teach them a few German phrases. But not everyone was happy. Some of the more zealous German POWs saw his friendliness with the enemy as a betrayal. They accused him of being an American sympathizer. They would whisper behind his back, "He is forgetting who he is. He is forgetting his duty to Germany." One day, Carter asked him if the whispers bothered him. Friedrich simply shook his head and smiled faintly. "I am not forgetting," he replied. "For the first time in years, I am remembering who I am." He was remembering the teacher, the husband, the father, the man he was before the uniform. Then, in March of 1945, a letter arrived for Friedrich. It was unusual. There was no name, no return address on the envelope, just a standard U.S. military screening stamp. With trembling hands, Friedrich opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message written in German. The handwriting was faint, but instantly familiar. It read, "Friedrich, I do not know if you live, but I pray you do. Clara and Elizabeth are safe. The war has taken our home, but it has not taken our hope. We are with my cousin near the Swiss border. Come back to us when the world allows it." Friedrich collapsed onto his bunk, not in despair, but in overwhelming relief. He clutched the letter to his chest as tears streamed down his face. His wife was alive. His daughter was alive. Hope, which had been a flickering ember, roared back into a brilliant flame. Carter, who had brought him the letter, stood in the doorway, a faint smile on his face. "See?" he said softly. "Your lullaby reached them somehow." Friedrich looked up at him, his eyes shining with tears of joy. "Perhaps," he whispered, "a song travels farther than a soldier." On the night before Friedrich and the other prisoners were scheduled to be repatriated back to a now defeated Germany, Carter brought his harmonica to Friedrich's barracks. He sat beside his friend on the edge of the cot, and without a word, began to play the lullaby one last time. He played it slowly, gently, each note filled with the emotion of their strange and powerful friendship. As the melody filled the quiet room, Friedrich closed his eyes and whispered the lyrics, words he hadn't spoken aloud since the night he left his home so many years ago. "Moon over the hills. Keep my family safe. Guide me back to them. When the last note faded into silence, Friedrich opened his eyes. He placed a hand firmly on Carter's shoulder. "One day," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you must come to Germany. You must come and see the family that your music helped keep alive inside of me." Carter nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Someday, Friedrich, I will." They shook hands, not as a guard and a prisoner, but simply as two men, as brothers forged in the unlikeliest of circumstances. The next morning, large military trucks lined up to transport the POWs to the coast. Friedrich climbed aboard one of them, carrying almost nothing. He had the precious letter from his wife, a small wooden bird he had carved for his daughter during his time in the camp, and in his pocket, Samuel Carter's harmonica.